What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Johnny Mac here. Just wanted to give you a heads up that if you are looking for a community that is open to discussion as far as mentorship, conservation, the wild, becoming a better person, and all of that, there is a group for you on Facebook, and it is called Soul Seekers. Soul Seekers, we are all about making ourselves a better person. We're all about making sure hunting lasts for generations to come and encouraging people to get plugged in. Whether you are someone who has something to give or someone who needs to soak it up like a sponge, this is a community for you, and I strongly encourage you that if you're on Facebook to join Soul Seekers, and if you're not on Facebook, hop on there just for that group. It is only going to be as powerful as we all make it. And so just remember that life happens for you, it doesn't happen to you, and that you can't outgive good. You can't outgive good, people. I want you to understand that, and I want you to believe it, because when we believe that and we lead with courage and we lead with intention, lives are changed, lives are transformed, just like on this podcast, transformation through primal adventure. Be blessed. Enjoy this episode. Talk soon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mac. Through this podcast, I'm on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters, both new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The Soulful Hunter Podcast is also proudly presented by the Crazy Elk Company. Based out of the state of Washington with products made in America, they are providing solutions with gear to problems you didn't even know you had. Their tag wallet is one of those solutions, and I had the pleasure of using it on all of my hunts this last year, and it is now a mainstay in my kill kit. The tag wallet is a water-resistant zippered pouch that comes with its own reusable zip ties to safely and securely store your notch tag for quick and easy access. For more information, go to crazyelkcompany.com and use the code SOULFUL with a capital S to save 20% at checkout. Be blessed, everyone, and as always, stay soulful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mac, and today I am joined by the legend black bear hunter himself, Douglas Boze. He is the author of the book, The Ultimate Guide to Black Bear Hunting, and we are going to talk all about the number one best animal to pursue in North America, the black bear. We're going to talk a little bit about spring seasons, August, September seasons, but what happens to these bears once the berries burn out, and how do you get on them? How do you hunt them? So we're going to cover all these different topics. Really looking forward to this. Douglas has been a savage of a human being and someone who mentored me and was able to sit down at a restaurant and talk to me as a brand new hunter all about hunting black bears, because that was my first target animal. And it is such an honor and privilege to be recording with you tonight, my brother. How are you doing?
Very well, Johnny Mac. Thank you for the fine introduction. I don't think I am worthy of all of that, but here we are. So I appreciate it, and always happy to talk bear hunting in general with you or anybody else. So
I appreciate
thanks
it.
for having me.
Well, you say, you don't think you're worthy, but at the end of the day, you don't realize how much you've impacted my hunting career from that one conversation at the restaurant in Marysville, Washington. That was back in 2015, the last time that you and I actually got to chat. And 2015, and 6 years later, and look at us, we're both published authors writing about black bears and totally dominating in our own mind. Legends in our own
Right?
mind. So how's your hunting season been going this year? You get yourself a black bear?
Yeah. So I set up a trail camera in the spot I like to go bear hunting at, and I noticed like a ton of predators on the trail camera. So I had 4 or 5 different cougar. I actually had 3 different cougar failed attempts at deer on the trail camera itself, and 4 different bear at least. And so I thought to myself, if I predator call this area and a bear or a predator comes in, um, and it's legal for cougar or whatever. I'm shooting. So just to try to alleviate some predator pressure in that area, so I ended up predator calling in the creek bed for like 45 minutes, and then right at 45 minutes, a bear came to my right, about 50, 60 yards out of the brush. And as soon as I saw him, I quit calling, and he crossed the creek and then went up on a log jam and just kind of when I lost sight of him, I thought he was going to the tree line. So I stood up and I started walking toward him, and he actually cut right over to me, climbed up on a log jam, and then was looking down on me from like under 20 yards. And I was scanning when I was looking at him to judge if he was a male or female, and looking for cubs and et cetera and so forth. And so I thought it was a male, and so when he stood up and kind of turned, I shot, and he just kind of fell off the log and died in a sandbox, basically. So that was fun, trying to keep the meat clean. But typically my shots are under 50 yards, usually 20 or so. This was a prime example, and I was happy to take a predator out of that area. So yeah, I was blessed with a black bear. I missed an elk at 40 yards with my bow a couple of weeks ago. Um, and like I said before the show, I always pray for, just give me one chance, just give me that one chance, and that's all I can ask for. And I had a good chance, and I hit a branch or something, but it was a clean miss, and I was happy for that I didn't wound the elk. And so that was my chance, and now we're off to modern firearm muley deer season coming up this weekend. So hopefully I can make something happen there.
Oh man, I love it. Yeah, it's been one of those seasons on missing elk. My hunting partner Tony, him and I, we got him on his very first elk, and just we thought we had him just ambushed. They were slowly feeding our way, and then out of nowhere, something just got them going, and they started running. Cow called. They hitched up, and he ranged them at 50 while they were running by. We got him to stop, and it was between 60 and 70 pin. He put the 60 on it, and that arrow fell short right between the legs, and it was like, oh. So
It was
I feel
it
your pain.
it was the funniest thing when I missed that cow, because I missed at 40, and she reminded me of just like a person of something happened, but you didn't know what. So she was just like looking around, spinning around, looking. She took a pee, and then the bull elk came flying out like he was a 5 point. He come barreling out and just like collected her and the rest of his herd and moved on. But it was something else to see that bull just charge in and round him up and take off. And yeah,
Yeah,
so it
quite
was fun.
impressive. Always fun to have those experiences in the woods. So let's dive into black bear hunting. First off, there's a lot of people, black bears in general, bear hunting in general is a trigger for a lot of people. For some reason, they feel like hunting predators is like super taboo, and there's this weird, you know, aura around hunting bears and eating bears and all this stuff. So, where did you find your love of bear hunting, and how did it come about? And was it always something that stood out to you more rather than hunting ungulates or all these other things? What's a little history on this all this for you?
The very first time I shot a bear, I was deer hunting, and I had very first time I shot a bear, and the very first time I saw a bear actually out in the wild. What I was deer hunting. I happened to be walking this logging road, and I kind of glanced over at this gully, and there was a bear, cinnamon face, sitting down, picking up something off the ground. And I thought, man, it's a huge bear. And so I shot, and it dropped, and it kind of did a death ball. And then I called up my dad on the CB. I says, hey, I got a bear. Come help me pack it out. So then we go around and we walk up, and it was definitely ground shrinkage. It was a smaller bear, not much bigger than a great lab, a lab type dog, but maybe 1.5 times the size. She was picking maggots off of a dead deer off of a cougar kill, and that's what she died in, was that smelly pile. But from there, that was the first time, and it kind of triggered something in me. I was late 20s, very early 30s, if I recall right, and I'm 45 now. Um, and I just wanted to learn more about it. And originally I was kind of scared of bears. I think like a lot of people are. I thought that they were bigger than what they are. If I was looking, I would always be looking too high, because I'm thinking, a bear's huge, it's going to stand out. But really they're your knee height, or mid thigh, something to that effect. They can hide easy in the brush. Um, for me, after that first bear, I wanted to just learn more and more about it. And my brother David was kind of a hunter of bear recreationally. He wasn't super into it, but he had some spots, and so he kind of took me out a couple times, and I got to learn more and more about it. And with bear and hunting, for me, predator calling is a big thing. And what introduced me to predator calling was Randy Anderson on the Culling All Coyotes series. He did a lot of coyote calling, predator calling, and the very first time I ever predator called, I called in a bobcat at a half an or excuse me a coyote at a half an hour and a bobcat at 45 minutes on the same set. And from there I was hooked. I was like, man, if I can communicate with animals like this is amazing. And so that kind of morphed into, how do I get bear out of brush? How do I explore real thick areas that we have around the Pacific Northwest and get bear to come to me? And so then I started to learn more and more about predator calling, and predator calling specifically for bear. um, and so that's kind of my history of, kind of how I got started. And then it just kind of grew. Shooting that first bear kind of planted a seed in me, and it just kind of grew into the tree of bear hunting that we have before us. I hopped online and I just read everything I could about people's stories and how they hunted, and and then I decided to digest all that and then give it out to the world, because there was, in a lot of states you can't use bear, or excuse me, you can't use hounds and bait. Washington is one of those. And so there's a lot of questions online about how do you hunt bear. And I had had some success over the years on finding them. So I just wanted to kind of put that out and share it with the world. And so that's kind of where we ended up.
Man, that's so cool. You know, for me as a hunter, I told you this before we started recording. I believe that black bear hunting is the ultimate animal to pursue for new hunters. Because ungulate seasons, deer, elk, all that, they're so short. They're so restricted based off of where you can hunt and what type of animal you can shoot and all these different, what weapon, what unit, all this stuff. Bear is bear. You can shoot both male and female. You don't, it's not even illegal to shoot a sow with cubs. It's just what ethically not good within the hunting realm. It doesn't say it's illegal. It just says please don't shoot a sow with cubs in at least in the state of Washington regulations. But with
Yeah, in this state, in other states.
right, okay, yeah. So that is inexperience on my part when I speak there. But maybe you can address that a little more.
No, no, that's okay. That's okay. Like in Alaska, it's illegal to shoot a sow with cubs. Um, but you're right, and that's a good point. That's something I didn't bring up. Is like being able not to have to choose your weapon for bear. You can hunt them with a rifle, muzzle loader, archery, pistol, provided the barrel length is the correct length. The length of season, all of that was a huge attractant to me as to being able to get out and hunt bear from August till November 1st. That's a long time, and it's before anybody else can really get out in the woods, and it's just and that's provided you don't draw a spring tag. So that was a huge attractant for me as well. Just being able to get out there and hunt more.
Yes, absolutely. And for all you out of state listeners, if you ever want to come to the state of Washington, it's only $250 for out of state bear tag here, which is a pretty phenomenal deal. And if you are willing to hike to get up into the berry fields of the Pacific Northwest, you're going to see some black bears. So let's get into this, because we could talk so much about why to bear hunt and all that. Let's talk how to bear hunt. And so now let me say this caveat here is that listeners, I bought Doug's book. I'm a owner of the Ultimate Guide to Black Bear Hunting, and at the same time, I don't want to have this podcast be an excuse for you not to go support a local hunter, someone who's giving back into the community. So go buy his book, and we're going to make sure to share that at the end of where you can find that, and then also we'll have a link to that in the show notes. However, Doug, if we can just kind of go through the season, spring, fall, late fall. And that late fall is where I really want to hit home on, because, everyone, when I got into hunting, everyone's like, okay, find the berries, find the bears. Find the berries, find the bears. But no one actually, for new hunters, really identifies what it means to find the berries. Because as someone who lives in the lowlands of Western Washington, we have Himalaya blackberries all over the place. Well, so what does that mean? So what type of berries are we looking for? And so let's back it up just real briefly. When it comes to spring bear hunting, what are you focusing on? Where are you looking? And what to expect? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, listeners, the one thing I want you to take away from this entire podcast is find the food, find bears. You need to figure out what they're eating that specific type of year or time of year because the food sources change throughout the year. So just to say find berries, you're going to find berries. Well, that's great, but that only works for when the berries are in. So, for example, in the springtime, you want to look for areas that are turning green first, grassy areas, areas that have skunk cabbage, wild onions in eastern Washington or the more arid areas. So areas that are greening up first and foremost should be your key in for spring bear. And depending on where you're at, that changes a little bit. So in western Washington, another key you want to look for is um, trees that are like 5 to 8 years old. If you put your hands together, you make a C with one hand and a C in another, and you put that together and you kind of spread that out just a little bit, that's about the size of the tree you want to be looking for. So while I'm driving around or while I'm hiking around, if I see a hillside with like yellow dying Douglas firs or like red dead Douglas firs, and you can almost see the path of the bear that hikes down that hill and damages those trees. The bear is getting into those trees and it's stripping the bark and it's eating the cambium layer of those trees. And so that's why in Washington we have a lotto system for a spring bear hunt to help alleviate some of that damage that's done by bears to the timber industry. Um, the other thing you can look for is if you know of a good calving area for deer or elk, they will definitely do a number on them. So if there's a certain hillside or something to that effect that you know of where they drop calves, definitely pay attention to that. But usually while I'm hunting, I'm looking for those damaged trees in greened up areas.
Now, can you speak a little bit, because one of the things that sets bears apart is that their breeding season's in the springtime. And so that May to June timeline is where you're going to get a lot more. Bears are prone to roam already. They're animals that just kind of wander around. But if you find a good location and you're not seeing bears, it's not uncommon to just stay there and continue and wait for a bear to show up. Is that how you go about, or do you more focus on hopping around to different locations, finding the green, finding the bear peels, all that?
Uh, Personally, I'm usually done hunting in the spring. If I draw a spring bear tag, I'm done before the rut even starts because I usually tag out mid-April. Um, I kind of like to get them tagged out. The sooner the better because the better the hide, and I like bear hides. So they're coming fresh out of their den and they're all furry from the fall, from the winter. So the sooner I can get them, the better. But I do look for the food source and I look for fresh sign. If I had the opportunity to hunt during the bear rut, I would be looking at like old logging roads, just looking for those boars cruising for a receptive female, a receptive sow. So I would definitely be just keeping my eye out for any open areas, include logging roads. Like I said, they're like us. They like the easy way. They like to take those roads, and so if it's available, why not? Unless you're going to be up in the high country, looking for bears, so you want to watch those meadows and whatnot. But
Oh,
again, me personally, I'm looking for green up and sign.
yep. All right, I love that. Some great points. In state of Washington, by the way, I just want to say this, and all you listeners who are state of Washington residents, go let your voice be heard on the public opinion for spring bear hunting. Has that closed, or is that still open, Doug? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head. I commented on it twice, um, so I hope it's still open. But you are correct. We do need to remind bear hunters and deer hunters and grouse hunters, any hunter, any fisherman should mention something on there. Because if they take away spring bear hunting, they won't be satisfied until they take away fall bear hunting, until they take away trapping, until they take away everything.
Yep.
Death by a thousand cuts.
Yep.
So that's what the
There's a famous quote that I always talk about. Is first they came for the trade unionists, but I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for the uh, the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't say anything. And then it continues on, and then they came for me, and there was no one left to say anything. And the point is that
Right.
even if you don't hunt bear, even if you don't hunt but you enjoy them, if you want, I mean, at the end of the day, look at what they're doing. The government is telling you what you have to put in your body to keep your job. Do you think that they care what animal you can hunt or what you can and cannot do on public land? No. They think that they can control everything that we do, so we need to make sure we take a stand and join forces and let our voices be heard, because it is all about we the people, not rules for thee, not for me. So I want to just share all that
Yeah.
with all you listeners, and because I'm passionate about it. Hunting will not last if we don't stand for our freedoms now. And that means getting involved in any way, shape, and form that you can, whether it's letting your voice be heard on a public opinion matter with Fish and Game, or whether it's getting out in the streets, waving your flag, and saying, no, I do not comply and do not consent. So that's a little soapbox for all you listeners, because you need to understand this, that this podcast is only this podcast because of the courage it took for me to become a hunter. At the same time, the courage it takes for us to get out of our comfort zone and do things that we're not used to doing. Um, Resistance breeds growth, and we are in a time of resistance, and it's time to get out of our comfort zone. So, Douglas, thanks for letting me share all that. Let's dive in to fall hunting. This is the berry season in the state of Washington. Black bear opens August 1st. It is a lovely time. It's hot out. Mosquitoes are out. It's my favorite time. It's my favorite hunt of the year is what I always look forward to, is getting up into the high country during that time. What advice do you have for listeners to get them on their way, get them going?
Um, like I said, find the food and find bears. So you need to find the food source that bear are hitting for your specific area. So, it's going to be different depending on the environment and the elevation and from year to year, too. I mean, berries ripen up different times a year, depending on their sunlight, depending on the water. In Western Washington, I'd be looking for, in my opinion, the low lying, I don't know their name, but the low lying vine blackberries that come in shaded areas that are real small. They're good for pies. Those kind of come in first. Then you get salmon berries, then you get blackberries, then you have the huckleberries are already in as well. So you want to find berries and you want to find areas that don't have human interruption necessarily. Um, so, bears, they don't like to hang out with people all the time. And so the further away you can kind of get from people where those blackberries and other berries are, the better your chances. And remember, it's hot out. In August, it's 85, 90 degrees, sometimes hotter. Put on a black sweater and go walk outside and mow your yard and see how much you like that. Or put on the black sweater and then go hang out by a nice cold creek and see how that feels. It's a lot better down by the cold creek in the shade, right? So that's where bears are going to be hanging out. They're going to be hanging out in cool areas. They're going to be staying out of the sun until early morning. They're going to be active, and then in the evening they're going to be more active as it cools down. So that's where I focus. I don't even hunt half the time. I don't even hunt during the daytime, midday heat in August. I might be out there at like 3 p.m. I'll start showing up, and then I'll go swimming down by a creek or something, waiting for it to cool off. But yeah, most of my hunts in August are for late afternoon, evening.
Mm. Nice. Okay, so it's easy to talk about like Western Washington blackberries, or it's easy to talk about the high alpine blueberries and huckleberries. What about the states or the side of the states, the regions that aren't very big in berries, or like what we would consider edible berries? What are the bears looking for in Eastern Washington, in Idaho, in these places where berry patches just aren't like overly common?
Sure. So back east they have acorns, as old Clay Newcomb likes to call them, acorns, mass crops that come in later in the fall. But like Eastern Washington, more arid areas, you want to look for, again, you want to look for those cool draws, cool creek beds. And when I say cool, I mean temperature wise. It's cooler down in those spots. That's where bear are going to be hanging out. and you're going to find rose hips. Um, those type of berries they're red. They're about the size of a quarter. They have thorns all over the stems and whatnot. Bears is pretty good. Wild onions. When I was elk hunting just recently, a bear was turned into, and this is very common, especially in eastern Washington or arid areas. They were turned into stumps, looking for termites, looking for ants, looking for beehives, um, any insect type of stuff. If you're hiking along and you see a ripped up stump or a rolled over log that looks funny, it's all been torn into, that's bear sign. You should pay attention to that. A bear was there at one point, so maybe there will be another one in that area. And again, they also in the summertime they're chasing, or fall. They're still chasing calves and fawns too. That's a good food source for them. So yeah, just kind of keep an eye on areas with food and cooler temperatures.
One of the things that I picked up along the way with having a conversation with the old trapper over in Eastern Washington that I had a pleasure of talking with, he was talking about bearberries. Are you familiar with bearberries? Kinnikinnick? Yeah, kinnikinnick berries.
Um, Kinnikinnick
It's
doesn't sound familiar. So, uh,
no, go ahead. I'm looking at the pronunciation of this word right now to make sure I'm saying it
oh,
properly.
okay. Um, there's another pile of different type of berries over there in outside of Ellensburg where I hunt for elk. Those are called black caps, but they're black cap raspberries, and we don't really have them over here so much. But those are pretty plentiful over there on certain hillsides, and so you can look out for those too. But yeah, any sort of vegetation, but a lot of, in my opinion, in arid areas, they definitely work the bugs a lot more than they do over here, where it's a lot more noticeable
Mm.
because there's a lot of bugs over there, and that's a good food source for them.
So like bugs and grubs, so tearing up stumps a whole lot more and stuff like that. Is what you're talking about?
Oh yeah, yeah, rolling logs, lifting up rocks, that type of stuff. Yeah.
There's a common misconception, I feel like, among people who don't hunt bears, where we think that all black bears just want to eat fish. Like, hey, get a fish out of a stream, and I feel like that is this more of an Alaskan style bear rather than it is a lower 48 state bear. Do you have any experience with that?
The only black bear I've seen eating fish was when I was in Alaska, hunting black bear. I actually even saw a coyote carry off a whole salmon, which was something else to see come, running off with a 25-pound salmon in its mouth. Um, but so yeah, in the lower 48, I don't see it. I'm not saying it doesn't happen because I'm sure that it does, but I just don't see it. I see them hit berries and grubs, stumps, huckleberries a lot more often than salmon.
Yeah. I love it. Okay, so one of the things that I am specifically wanting to have a conversation with you about on this podcast is understanding, and I've had a lot of conversations with people that they're always like, okay, these berries, I'm finding the berries, I'm hanging out. The south side of mountains, because we live in the northern hemisphere, it burns off faster. The bears shift over to the north side as the berries come in. But once we work our way into October and those berries start to disappear and things start to change, you always talk about you love to then transfer into predator calling. And so you want to go ahead and just talk about predator calling for black bears, time of the year, what calls you use, how long you have to sit for, and all of that goes along with it.
Yeah, so that's a big chunk of info, but we'll get into it. So, um, I like calling like any time of the year. If I'm bored and I'm not seeing nothing, I like calling just to throw a line out there to see what I catch. Is kind of how I relate it to. I relate it to fishing. Um, and if I find an area that looks bearish to me, like there's a lot of, it looks like it holds a bear, similar to bass fishing, where there's a sunken log. You probably think there's a bass under there. I'll cast out. I'll predator crawl there for a while. So what I normally do is I find a safe area, kind of like on top of a log jam, or I'll have a tree to my back. I'll have something behind me that will let me know or protect me that something's coming behind me, because they will do that. Cougar will do that. Bear will do that. And then I will call for like an hour to an hour and 20 minutes. And when I say call, I don't mean solid screaming the whole time. I mean, you're making noise often, resting for, 30 seconds to a minute listening, but continually calling. And it's not just, rant, rant, rant all the time. It's different pitch. Create the scenario in your head, like the old Randy Anderson used to say. Create a scenario in your head of, hey, maybe a fawn is hurt, and squealing for a while, and then coyotes show up, so you can throw in some coyote howls and coyote distress, and then they end up killing it, and then it just drops off. So, and try to make that with the sounds, so you would start off kind of quiet and sad and lonely, and that sound, it reaches out. Think of like dropping a pebble in a pool of water, and that the harder you throw that pebble, the farther those waves go out. And that's the same way with predator calling. You call kind of soft to reach out what's close, and then as the set continues, you breathe harder and harder. You push that sound further and further out to try to draw those things in. And then as the animal in the scenario dies, it just drops off, or it wanes out back to being real quiet. So that's kind of the way I call. As far as the type of calls I use, it really varies. I'll do calf distress, like an elk calf. I'll do fawn, jackrabbit, cottontail, any sort of annoying, irritating sound that you can't stand to listen to. I'll do that. Predator calling is you almost want to zone it out while you do it, and don't think that you have to call perfectly. Like, oh, I'm calling, but I don't sound right. That doesn't matter. You're just trying to pique the interest of the animal, the interest of the predator. And so, so for example, when car alarms first came out, that's how old I am. I can remember when we didn't have car alarms. And when car alarms first came out, you hear a car alarm go off, you're like, oh man, there's a car alarm, someone's breaking in. But then, 6 months later, you heard the same alarm 600 times. You're like, I don't care about that, until something else came out, and then you'd be more interested. It's the same way with predator calling. If everyone is using cottontail distress, that bear might have heard that before and might not be interested in it. So switch it up. Maybe a pig distress, or maybe even a cub distress. Something different to pique that interest. And so I'll call for an hour. I'll build that scenario, and I will let the sound do the walking for me as well. So if it's a nice creek draw, or a valley, kind of a rocky valley or something down below, I let that sound carry it out for me, so I don't have to do all the hiking. I try to call the bear into me. The other thing too is, like, you don't want the wind in your face. You want the wind at your back, blowing down your firing lane. So predators, they'll try to circle you. They'll try to circle and get that smell to figure out what is that noise. And so if it's blowing at your face, they're going to circle behind you, smell you, and then take off. I prefer no wind, but if you are going to call in wind, either wind that's blowing at your back, or a crosswind, real light, is nice.
That's
And so
completely
you
different
want your
than
shooting
coyote
lane.
hunting, which is interesting. I thought you always in coyote hunting you always want that face wind or a crosswind, but you're saying you actually want it from
Well,
behind, just so
you
that
want it from behind, or a crosswind.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
And
interesting.
coyotes will do the same thing. Like when I first started calling, I would always think, oh, I want the wind in my face, because as a hunter, we want wind in our face as we're walking or whatever, right? Um, but and that's all good and well while you're walking. But if you're sitting stationary and something's screaming and they're coming in to check what is making all that noise, they are going to circle to smell that. And so you want them to circle kind of in front of you. And so if you have another caller or another hunter too with you, you can set them off to either side of you, 50 to 70 yards, as long as you know where they're at, and you have your lane of fires and stuff. But that helps too. Like if you have a second or even a third hunter, because lots of times I've had bear come right in, and they'll hang up because the brush is too thick, and they're not 100% sure what I am. But they're there. I can hear them growling or shaking trees or whatever it is. But if I had a guy to my right or left, they could have easily shot that animal. Um, in fact, the very same thing happened to my son. I was predator calling with my son Hayden, and it was thicker than I'd like. This was just this year, and he was on a stump. I wanted to move him more to my left, but just kind of the way things set up, I was like, I'll just sit here. I'll get behind you. We predator called. A bear came right in, maybe 20 yards from him, shaking a tree, all pissed off. We couldn't get a shot because of the brush. But if he would have moved to the left, like I had kind of wanted, that bear probably would have been dead. but he was kind of directly in front of me. Um, so yeah, and predator calling, depending on your state, you can use hand calls. I like to use hand calls a lot, but you can also use electronic calls depending on the regulations. But the thing you want to remember is like call for an hour, and then if nothing happens, still sit there for like 15, 20 minutes. Because bear will sometimes come in as well after things have died down. They'll come in to check out, you know, what all that ruckus was. Or cougar do that a lot too.
Interesting. Okay, so I have a location that is about 15 minutes from my house, and I have been on fresh bear poop multiple times. And I've sat down and called, and I have not had any success except for one time on my way into where I was working in. It was a dead end logging road surrounded by reprod, and I had what I think was a bear in the brush about 20 yards as I was getting to that set. Fresh poop everywhere. And it sounded like, I don't know if it was like an elk barking at me or like a deer blowing like hoof, hoof. And the way it moved, didn't sound like a deer. Um, but that was like, okay. And I tried to make like the smallest, slightest sounds to perk its interest and bring it to me, but I never had any action. And now I just went back and called on Monday, and I didn't see any fresh bear sign. Um, but it's not like close to the mountains, and it's an interesting location. And so here I am, and for all the other hunters that are experiencing this, what is your next step? There was a place where there was a lot of bear sign. Have they just completely disappeared and wandered off to a new location, or are they still in there, you think?
It depends on the food source. So, in my opinion, if the berries have died out, so for example, right now, let's just say that in October you were hunting an area that had a lot of berries in it, and the berries are gone, and there's not really anything else going on. The bear likely has moved on. But real quick, just to touch on something that you said, you had called and you haven't had any luck. You didn't call anything in. I want to point out that there has been numerous times where I've had a second hunter or a third hunter, and I have called and I never saw the animal come in, but they saw it. And so if I was calling by myself, I would have thought, oh, that was a bust. I never called in nothing. In reality, I had called in, one or two bear behind me or something to that effect to where they saw it and I never did. So don't think that just because you didn't call something in, something didn't come check you out, because that happens very often, I think.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
in your situation though, getting back to what you were saying, if you're not finding any more fresh sign, um, and you've called a couple times, nothing's happening, I would definitely move on. Move on to try to find another food source. Head up higher in the mountains because there's still some remaining blueberries and stuff like that they're hitting huckleberries. Um, but yeah, I would definitely head higher up. And that's not to say that there's not a straggler here or there. And it doesn't hurt to call because it still is cougar season, so you can still get a cougar. Um, but yeah, I would just check for sign. If I'm not seeing sign and no food, I would just move on.
Interesting. There are some lingering berries that are still a reddish color, and they're late in. So I would imagine that they're not going to go too far. But that's really interesting. Okay, so when it comes to calling, do you sit down and you like, okay, I have an hour and a half to hunt, so I'm going to call for an hour and a half in one location, or how do you plan out your later season bear hunts when you are not on food sources and you're working calling?
Um, I'm looking for areas that look bearish to me, and I say that a lot. And then people are like, "Well, what is that?" And it's just kind of a feeling I get, um, of areas that it just looks like it holds a bear. It's brushy, it's rocky, especially in the later season. Just kind of nasty areas that are kind of steep. They might be tearing into stumps down there. There might be some residual food somewhere or another. Uh, but for me, I look for areas that the sound will carry and carry a great distance, if at all possible, because that just means I'm covering more ground, and I'm giving ample time for that bear to come to me. So you don't want to call like a coyote, call for 15, 20 minutes, half hour. If nothing comes in for coyotes, usually nothing's coming in. bear are a little bit different. Bear are kind of like a kitty cat, where if you're playing with a kitty cat and you're throwing a string around, the cat's really interested. But as soon as you stop, the cat's like, "Meh, I don't really care." But when you start that back up again, the cat's right back interested. Same with bear. When you're predator calling, lots of times they'll be moving while you're calling. So you have to think, if a bear is on the other side of a canyon and it hears me, how long is it going to take for that bear to walk from point A to point B? You have to give it time. You have to have patience. So you just keep calling away on it. And I've seen this to where as soon as I stop calling, the bear will stop. As soon as I start calling, the bear will walk. And that's not every time. Every bear is kind of different. Um, but I try to give, an hour of calling, 20 minutes of waiting roughly. If my knees can take it, sitting still for an hour and a half in the freezing cold is not necessarily all that fun. Um, but, but that happens. Um, so yeah, I mean, just late season predator calling. I'm looking for gullies. I'm looking for valleys, maybe areas where there's been a lot of deer hunters, and there's maybe some gut piles floating around, something to that effect. Elk, same thing. Elk hunters. Um, Yeah, just the other week I was elk hunting uh, with my dad. I should say I was predator hunting with my dad. He was elk hunting, and I found a nice little canyon with a creek in it and a lot of brush and elk. But there was a bear working that area. He was tearing into stumps, but that was the food source. I saw prints for sign. I had heard him in the brush. I just couldn't break him loose, and so but that was an area that looked bearish, a lot of brush, water, cover. They like those thick, nasty areas.
You know what's really interesting is I didn't know this right away because when I was learning how to hunt, you're talking about not you, the royal you. People talk about looking for sign. So sign for animals, tracks, droppings. For antlered animals, you got the rubs, but for bears, what I really started picking up on is what I call bear tunnels. And because like you said earlier, a typical black bear, your average Washington black bear is about knee to thigh high, right? Standing up when it's on all fours. Well, they burrow little tunnels through these blackberry bushes and the shrubbery and all that stuff. And so when you look at that hole, if you're not experienced, you look at it and be like, that's not a bear. That's got to be a coyote. That's got to be something else. And turns out more often than not, that's actually a bear doing that. And the holes aren't that big that they're walking through these little tunnels. Do you use that as one of the signs for you to pick up on bear activity?
Absolutely. So it's funny you bring that up because the last time I went out hiking, I pulled my trail cam where I shot that bear and where those cougar were. And as I was walking in, the leaves were starting to fall around the blackberries and stuff, and you could more easily see the bear tunnels that were punching through all these clear cuts. Like you say, they're not necessarily all that big and they're low to the ground. But in the fall and or in the summer when I walk by and I see those, I'll stop and I'll look at the thorns or the thistles that are sitting around there, and I'll see if I see black bear hair. And sometimes you can catch black bear hair on there, and sometimes it's black, sometimes it's color phase. But that kind of tells you the bear that are in the area. Um, and that's a key point. I mean, even if you come across a blackberry bush that looks like a kid took a stick to it and just beat it to hell, take a look at the thorns and stuff around there and see if there's bear hair on there, because lots of times that's the way it looks when a bear gets done eating those berries, and they leave their telltale hair on some of those thorns sometimes. Not every time, but sometimes. But yeah, that's
And
definitely a something I look for.
I love it. And then that is thank you for affirming me on that. I love that. And these are all the thoughts that just roll through my
Yeah.
head as I'm out there in the woods by myself, being like, hey, look at that. What also turned out to be really good scouting for me was trail running. As I'm running on a trail and I'm looking through these blackberry bushes, looking for little tunnels and just kind of making mental note, like, what am I looking at? What am I seeing? What activity is around? And then all of a sudden you see some poop with seeds in it and you're like, hey, that's not a dog. And, and these things, the puzzle starts coming together. And before you know it, you're in the bear woods, man. Things are looking berry, and it's quite awesome.
Yeah, I think bear hunting And so I always say, like, I started out as a rifle hunter, and then I moved to bow hunting. And bow hunting makes you, to me, it makes you a better hunter. You have to move slower, you have to get closer, etc., and so forth. But bear hunting makes you more aware as well. At least it did me. So, if I saw a stump, I would question, why is that stump tore up? When was it tore up? Are there leaves over it that make it look old? Why is this, alder broken in half at my shoulder length? And you get to learn, well, a bear did that in the spring or whatever because he's making a scent. He broke it over his shoulder. He stood there and made his mark. Um, Being observant while you're hunting and looking for sign is very important, and it causes you to slow down, and it causes you to find areas that you might have just blown right by. So that's important, just to slow yourself down, be observant, and question, why is it this way? Why is this bush look this way? Why are things this way in the woods?
Yeah, and this is why I love bear hunting so much because you can use it for to make yourself a better hunter. You're not just looking for deer tracks or all these other things. You use it, and when you're out there looking for bear sign, you're also coming across deer sign. So what I've noticed, all my listeners out there, is this bear spot that I have close to my house that was just packed with bear sign. I wasn't seeing deer sign at all. And now that the bear sign is decreasing, I'm starting to notice way more deer tracks in the area. And so, put that in the back of your head and use that for scouting for opposite seasons and using it. We are hunters. We're not just specific deer hunter, bear hunter, elk hunter. And, we want to be woodsmen. And I think that's one of the skill sets that bear hunting does for us as hunters is it makes us better across the board. So
And I think that's part of the allure of bear hunting as well, is that you're hunting a hunter. You're a predator hunting a predator. And granted, they eat a lot of berries, they eat a lot of insects, but they also they do a lot of damage to fawn and calf populations and stuff like that. So it's just different. Hunting something that can hunt you changes the game a little bit, I think, in your mind and in your soul. It changes you.
and I would agree 100% because the first animal I killed was a black bear, and I'm talking about the soulful hunter, and I talk about how it's hunting has the power to transform lives through primal adventure, and I truly, truly believe that because it challenges your soul, it challenges your courage muscle to be like, okay, there's a predator, and everything that we have been told as little boys growing up about the big bad bear in the woods is gonna come get you and all this, and you know we get to challenge ourselves and become, men or women of courage and valor to go out there and put ourselves in positions that are going to be making us better people. And that is why hunting is so powerful. Let's talk about a little bit of something you've created, unless you want to add anything to that. But you have your own predator calling app.
Yeah, so I have kind of a series of apps: the Ultimate Predator Call, Ultimate Deer Call, and the Ultimate Coyote Calls. But for this, we'll just stick with the Ultimate Predator Calls. Um, and so, electronic calls, I think, are great, and especially for cougar or for people who are a little apprehensive and they, scared about getting jumped or something like that, they can put the sound kind of away from them. But a lot of those calls, they're just very short sound bites and they're on a loop. And to me, they don't sound very natural. And so what I did was record myself calling shorter sets that aren't as repeatable, I would say, as obviously repeatable as just a very short loop that you would normally get. Um, and it's available for iPhone or an Android. What you do is you just push it to a Bluetooth speaker, so you have an electronic caller for under $5 instead of spending $100 to $400 for a big other type of electronic collar. And I've seen a lot of success with that. There's been a lot of people who have gotten a hold of me. One guy got a bobcat his first time out with his wife. Another guy, Crooked Horn Outfitters, I think, on Instagram. They just called in a bear to 10 yards with the coyote and rabbit distress combo I had on there. There's been a lot of people have finding success with that. So that is available. It's just recordings of me calling for you is basically what it is.
I love it. How much does that app cost?
It's like 4.99.
It's a great deal. I have a
Yeah, and
portable
it's I think
speaker.
there's I
Go.
think there's like 14 sets. I could be wrong. But yeah, there's several different sets on there um, to change things up. And there's a repeat mode, so you can just hit repeat on there. You can change the volume with your phone. You can go to a dark mode. There's different backgrounds. There's all sorts of stuff.
I love it. I love it. Douglas, where can people find your book at, and any other tidbits you want to drop on us before we say adieu?
You can find the book anywhere online, like Amazon or Barnes and Noble. You can find it physically in stores in Cabela's. Some Barnes and Nobles do carry it, but just Google it online. Ultimate Guide to Black Bear Hunting. It should pop right up. And there's an ebook version too. If you don't want a physical version, you can get the ebook. As far as little tidbits, like I say, find food for that type of year or time of year, and find some bear sign. You're going to be finding bears, man. Just and don't think you have to be perfect predator calling. You're just trying to pique interest. If you have any questions, hit me up on Facebook or Instagram. Boze and Bears is my handle on Instagram, or you can just find me by my name on Facebook. Always happy to help. Um, but yeah, just good luck, or excuse me, good luck this rest of this season, and be sure of your targets and what's beyond, and spread the word. Be a mentor. I've helped a lot of people with my book go out and bear hunt and stuff like that, and I find that the most rewarding. I can't always hunt with a lot of people, but I've definitely enjoyed helping others through my writings, through books, through podcasts, that type of stuff. So it's
Yeah.
important. Be vocal, be helpful.
I love it. Man, Douglas, thank you so much. And hopefully, this is just a tidbit of me saying thank you back to you and getting a chance to record with you. Listeners, go buy Douglas's book, Ultimate Guide to Black Bear Hunting. I purchased it. I got it in the ebook format because I like to read on the go and always have access to it. Go give him a follow, give him a shout, and be blessed. And go chase those black bears, people. Get after it. It is going to blow your mind how much fun it is to hunt those things and then everything that goes with it. So, everybody, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Soulful Hunter podcast. I want you to be blessed. I want you to be of good cheer. Remember that life is happening for you, not to you. Freedom on. And as always, stay soulful. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.